Hello and welcome. I'm in conversation with Krishnakumar Natarajan, Executive Chairman of Mindtree, and we're in conversation about de-globalization and the toolkit that we need to build in order to fight it. But before we come to that, let me ask you, exactly a year ago, you said that protectionism was real. And there were costs that were rising, visa costs for instance, the challenges of actually setting up onshore talent to service offshore talent and everything that goes with running a successful IT company. So you were almost prescient at that time. So are you looking back in some satisfaction?
Not really. I think the way I looked at it then was that if you look at local economies, I think it was a reality to be relevant to their stakeholders. At least a certain rhetoric around the so-called protectionism was becoming a reality. And many times when you look at political environments, while you can pass them off as saying it's just a rhetoric,
Election, pre-election.
election, pre-election and so on. But at sometimes that becomes really the driving force. And it also becomes important to have a point of view as to whether that's going to become a reality. And how do you start thinking of the business models differently, not being very dependent on that. So one idea which has certainly driven us as Mindtree is to be locally local. Because I think when you access a market, it is important and also an expectation that you are relevant to the local economy. And as long as you think of your business as being locally local, at the same time see how you can drive efficiencies, drive synergies of skills and capability through a global model. I think both need to coexist.
So give us an illustration of that, how you've been locally local in some markets. Or
see, clearly when we say locally local, we even look at in terms of a very small local economy. So when we started thinking of de-risking or even think in terms of the next generation model, we'd rather build something which can deliver locally. And it was not in the context of a specific client. We said we should access a talent pool, how do we build capabilities in them and deliver in that local market. So we chose to be within a university ecosystem. So we chose to be at Gainesville in Florida, which is a university ecosystem, tied up with the University of Florida, which is amongst the top 10 engineering schools. And then started picking up people from there, trained them to be ready to deliver to customers in the United States of America. At the same time, we are also
when did you do this?
We did this about 4 years back. Not only that, today we are actively engaged with them in terms of some of their research areas. We fund research areas in artificial intelligence there. We fund research areas in terms of software engineering methods which they are doing. So which is how we have completely got integrated as a part of the local ecosystem. And for a company at our size, it's impossible to do it at the 50 states. So we actually chose that and just started a similar such exercise in the state of Washington, in the West Coast. So that's one way. And today if you go to a small town like Gainesville and you sort of call out saying, oh, I work for Mindtree, people recognize us because we've been relevant to the local economy, we get engaged in the society's activities there, we work with the Spastic Society there and so on. So that is what I think is very relevant in the future, where you become very much ingrained as a part of the local economy, create jobs there, and not only there, participate in how are you improving the ecosystem around there as a company.
Right. So some of your industry colleagues that I have been interviewing, they feel that while they too may be doing similar things,
absolutely.
But on the other hand, the combination of having a local on-site engineer backed by obviously a large team sitting in India is critical. Rather, the first part is critical to making sure the second part works. But and that seems to be somehow a big handicap the industry is not able to get out of. Why is that?
See, I think as it changes and obviously also as the customer demand changes, I think some of those will necessarily need to change. Because if you look at the last 25 years, a large percentage of the work which you have done is really to bring in efficiency into how is the customer running their business. So I had a set of technology solutions by which I am running the business, and how do I make that far more efficient, which necessarily meant that I need to have a small team which understands what the customer is doing, which is close to the customer, and they serve as a bridge between the work which gets done maybe in a more cost competitive location like India or Philippines or somewhere. And that is how the whole value chain of trying to run that becomes thing. But if you look at what is increasingly changing, when clients are saying, okay, we want to become more accessible to our consumers using digital technologies, a lot of it is experimentation, a lot of it needs to be done quickly, lot of it needs to be done in very short time spans because they want to see the results of it. Those probably will need that they need to be done close to the customer, which means practically there is almost very little effective value adding work which will be able to do back end. But some parts of the research can be done back end in terms of what are the ways by which you can solve the problem, these are the 4 alternatives. So, as long as you have done a basic research saying these are the 5 alternatives which does not need closeness and presence to the customer, those can be done offshore. Then the real execution of experiment that needs to be done close to the customer. As you move on to the next stage, the client says, okay, out of these 4 I see this as being the most effective, I will do that. Then they want to roll it out across multiple locations. There again I think you can leverage the model of offshore, where the essential core of what needs to be done at various locations can be done offshore, but the front end work needs to be done close to the customer.
Right, and if the cost of that front end goes up as is being envisaged in the United States right now,
right.
So is that a big hit on this on your industry?
See, initially there will be cost pressures, but what I do believe is, while today as you are doing the model,
because the local people might say you have to pay $130,000 a year minimum, or else
yes,
you don't get the H1B.
That is right. So, to that extent the cost implications of that are certainly going to be there in the short run, but what I do believe is today you do not have the advantage of scale of those work which you do, and the cost has increased. So, obviously it has an impact on margin, but once you start doing that on scale, I think clearly the costs can clearly get apportioned over a larger scale. The other big difference which I see is, earlier when the client was transitioning their work onto us, the quantum of work was clearly known. Today the quantum of work is not known, because many times they are experimenting, and hopefully there will be a majority or even a good percentage of the customers will start experimenting more. So, even the additional cost will get apportioned over larger scale of work which you do. So, I do see this cost impact as something, yes, which will be there, which will have an impact on margins in the short term. As the scale of that improves, I think clearly that will not be a major issue.
Right. So, I am going to come to the toolkit in a bit, but if you were to look at the composition of your business, let us say majority weighted with banking and financial services, how is that going to be affected by deglobalization, and does your mixture of business or your mix of business offer you a better hedge, or is that possible at all?
See, again, if you really see, I think we have almost equally sort of weighed between banking financial services, but a larger percentage of what I think our business, which is more what is the current need of the customer, comes from travel and hospitality and retail and consumer products. Both those are very consumer driven businesses, where there is a dramatic transition, disruption happening because of the way in which people want to engage with their consumers. So, clearly we see great opportunities in both those segments. Apart from that, we also do, I would say, almost 1/4 of our revenues comes from technology, media and services, which again is an industry going through tremendous transition. Now, today people do not think of themselves just as product companies, but how do they build applications on top of it which can really be relevant to their consumers. So, while there are opportunities in helping them build the products quicker, faster and cheaper, today new opportunities in terms of building applications on top of those products is also coming, and that again is a segment where there are not too many players. So, overall in this transition, as a company, we are very optimistic and confident that this is certainly giving us a great opportunity to sort of not only just survive, but also thrive.
Right. When earlier you had said that again NASSCOM had a certain rate of growth, but you would beat it, and,
yes,
and you don't give guidance.
Yeah.
But NASSCOM itself has now held back on providing any growth estimates for 17-18.
Yes.
So, what's your sense now?
See, overall if I see the growth as well as the optimism with customers, we are not hearing any negative trends from customers saying, you know what, my budgets are getting cut and consequently I need to think.
Yeah.
The
this I guess plays to the Gartner figure, which is 2.6%
yes,
growth to 5% growth. Yeah. So, all that is playing out. Okay.
Yes. But how would the customers spend? Would they sort of, what is becoming more and more clear to me, and again as a company what we are hearing from customers is, clearly there is optimism in terms of what they want to do. I think there is nature to experiment and do more things. But the fact is, are they going to go in for large projects which are global in nature? That is not clear. So, when you think of growth, you need to have visibility in terms of saying, you know what, these 4 customers of mine are going to roll out 5-6 global projects, each of which they will spend 50-100 million. That visibility is not there today, which probably again is the reason.
But you recently struck a $100 million deal.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, one of our customers crossed the 100 million, which itself for Mindtree it's a big sort of benchmark, because many times only the larger players have $100 million customers, which again represents that when you are aligned with the client's strategic directions, then obviously it turns out that you would also grow along with the strategic thrust of the
So, you are saying that the tide is rising
Yes.
Across the board, and if
Yes.
the tide rises, then the downwind pressures of de-globalization and some of the other factors which we have not touched upon,
Yes.
including automation, might be to some extent countered.
Yes. See, I wouldn't say the opportunities of automation is real. I think when I talked about what we hear from clients, that they are looking for far higher efficiencies, leveraging automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning and so on is real. And today automation and artificial intelligence is no more just a technology. It is delivering very significant efficiencies for the client, and they are wanting it quicker. The other key thing which I see with clients is today they do not see switch of vendors as a risk, because they believe that if there is somebody who can evolve a more elegant automation solution and commit productivity improvements, they are willing to switch. So, to that extent the nature of transitions in current run the business, the market is getting far more competitive, the client expectations clearly are very high. So, that is going to be a fairly challenging sort of aspect, because while on one hand we many times feel that is an opportunity for Mindtree, it is also a threat, because within our existing customers our clients are the same, saying that if you do not deliver a good solution, I might switch.
Right. And how are your customers responding to or addressing this whole H1B concern? I mean, are they with you, or are they saying you go figure it out yourself?
See, I do not think
I'm talking
clients
about US centric. I mean,
US centric. I do not think clients are concerned about it, but certainly from their own point of view, they do not want to get into the limelight. Launching a very large program where it means that some of their workforce need to be laid off and so on. So, clearly in those sort of initiatives, clients are far more cautious, to the extent we have had one or two clients who have just sort of shifted that, saying that, you know what, now the ecosystem or the environment is not right for us to launch it, we will think in terms of other ways of trying to drive the same change. So, to that extent the
shifted that, you mean they've walked away from a deal, or are they?
No, the deal is still on. They are rolling it out far more slowly, restructuring it differently.
Right. Okay. So, let me ask you the last question. I said, we started by saying that, what could be the tools for de-globalization? The tools apply to everyone. It could be to companies and to someone who leads a company like you. It could be to someone who works in a company or about to join the IT workforce, because this is all part of the same mix.
See, I do believe if you look at how one could, three tools in terms of thing. I think as a company, I think it is very important for companies to start thinking of themselves in terms of how relevant they will be to local economies. I think that is very fundamental. You can't think of yourself as an Indian company just accessing the US market and not impacting the local economy. The second key thing which as companies is very important to think of is how do you really think in terms of even a mobile workforce. I think all of us have sort of lived in the thing, while the older practice of staying lifelong for a company is no more there. You have always thought of people working with you all the time. Whereas I think the whole notion of mobile workforce, people who will come and work with you in a specific project and move out, is also very important. And in the context of a mobile workforce, how are you going to in a way still keep the ethos and culture of the company alive is very, very important, because they will really be client facing people. The third aspect is really, I think you can no more think of any business as something where you can plan maybe in a 3-year time horizon to maybe over the last few years you had a year. Now we really think planning needs to get far more dynamic, because the local contexts are changing and changing fairly dramatically. If you had asked me in May whether we would have anticipated a Brexit and that consequently will have an impact on one of our acquisitions which we did in UK, we would have never anticipated it. So, the planning cycle certainly needs to be far shorter and more agile, so that you are flexible, which means not really committing substantive fixed costs, so you are much more flexible. So, for a company, I think these three are very, very important, being locally local, thinking of more a mobile workforce, and being far more agile in how you plan for the businesses. I think it is important.
KK, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks, it's good to see you.
you.